Hello and welcome to another Picky Board Gamer episode. I'm Ektorakos and in today's video I'm gonna be showing you how to play Endeavor Edge of Sail. It's a very well structured game, plays in a very short time even with a high player count. This is gonna be a video about the main rules of the game. It's a personal favorite, so let's start right now. In Endeavor, players are trying to create the most glorious empire, and they are doing this mainly by advancing those 4 attributes on these 4 tracks on their personal board. Each one of these attributes is connected to a different thing. The top one is the industry attribute and is connected to constructing buildings. The second one is culture and is linked to population. A high level of culture enables the player to draw more population from his supply on his board on each turn. The third one is wealth. Players perform actions mainly from their buildings. This attribute helps them reuse their buildings. And finally we have influence. Players will be getting cards from the main board on their personal board, and this attribute increases the limit of cards they can keep at the end of the turn. Players need glory, which is another word for victory points in this game. They do that mainly through advancing those attributes, capturing specific positions on the board, constructing specific buildings, and getting some of the cards. We should now make a step back and set up the game. First of all, place the board in the middle of the table. Make sure you use the correct side of the board based on player count by examining this illustration here on the board. Place all the trade tokens inside the bag and then fill all the circular spaces depicted on the board one by drawing tiles from the bag at random. These are the asset cards. Distinguish them into 8 decks according to the illustration they have on their back. Then sort the cards of each deck according to the values they have in the bottom right, placing the lowest value on top of the deck. Then place each of the decks to their corresponding space on the board face up. These are the 6 governor cards, and at this moment we need to have this side face up. Now tuck each governor card under the board to its dedicated space next to the asset cards. Separate the buildings based on the number of bricks that are illustrated on the top right of the tile. This corresponds to the level of the building. Then separate each level of buildings by their type and place them in the corresponding spaces inside this plastic display. The 5 level buildings have to be shuffled and then place 4 of them face down in the bottom space and then place the remaining 3 tiles face up on the 3 spaces. These are the only level 5 buildings that will be used throughout the game. After you're finished, place this display next to the board. Each player gets a personal board and a set of components. Now select a player at random to be the first player and give him this first player token. Starting with the first player and continuing clockwise, each player must select the side of his initial building and place it on the first space right here. Then place a population token from your supply on this little space on the building. These here are the 4 attributes and players should place them at their corresponding position on their personal board. Now we're ready to begin. The game is played over 7 rounds and each round consists of 5 phases. Each phase is played in clockwise turn order, starting with the player who has the first player token. The phases are 1. The construction phase. Each player will construct one of the buildings. Secondly, the growth phase. Each player will receive new population from their supply on their harbor. Thirdly, we have the salary phase, where each player will be moving a specific number of discs from their buildings back to their harbor. If players are experienced, they can combine the first 3 phases of the round and play them together in player order. What I mean is that first player will play phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, then the second player will play phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and so on. Then game proceeds to phase 4, which is the action phase. It's the main phase of the game where players perform actions until everyone has passed. Finally, we have phase 5, which is the discard phase, and players will discard cards according to their limit. Now let's see each one of these phases in detail. Starting with the construction phase, each player constructs an available building from the display on his board. The level of the building must be equal or lower than the level reached by his industry attribute. So in this example, based on my current situation, I can choose any building that is up to level 3. I pick up the tile and I place it in the first open space on my board. If the tile depicts any attribute symbols on the bottom left, then the player must adjust these attributes immediately. If the tile depicts glory symbols on the bottom left, then this building will grant the player victory points at the end of the game. Many of the buildings depict on the bottom right side some action spaces that will be used in the action phase. Finally, we should say that constructing buildings already constructed in previous rounds is absolutely allowed. In the growth phase, players get new population discs from their supply on their harbor, indicated by the level reached by their culture attribute. In this example, I will get 3 new discs, and if I don't have enough discs in my supply, then I get as many as I can. In the salary phase, players move population discs from the building action spaces to their harbor. The number of discs moved is indicated by the wealth attribute. In this case, I can move 3 of my discs to my harbor. If I have more discs than I'm allowed to move, then I choose and move the ones I prefer. Now let's talk about the action phase. In the action phase, players take turns performing various actions, beginning with the starting player and continuing clockwise. On his turn, a player must either perform an action or pass. If a player passes, then he's out of the phase until everyone else has passed, and that's exactly when the action phase is over. The available actions are ship, occupy, war, payment, and draw. There are 2 ways a player can perform an action. One of them is to use a building with a vacant action space. He will then need a population disk that is available in his harbor, place the disk on the space, and perform the action depicted below. The second way is to use one of his available blue action tokens that he already acquired from a previous action. He will discard the token and perform the action depicted on it. There are some buildings and action tokens that depict multiple actions separated with a slash. In this case, the player must choose one of the depicted actions to perform. There are also some buildings like this one that depict multiple actions with a plus sign between them. In this case, of course, the player will perform all of the actions depicted. If a player cannot perform an action through these ways, then he must pass. Well, the most important actions in the game are ship and occupy, in a way that through these actions, players may place their available population discs to strategic locations that will grant them victory points in the end of the game. However, in the beginning, only Europe is available for such a placement. All other 6 regions are initially locked, but not their shipping tracks. Each locked region has a shipping track, and that is the key for the players to unlock them, and they can do this with the ship action. When a player performs the ship action, he must have an available population disk on his harbor to place it on the board. If he doesn't have such a disk, then he cannot perform the action. One of the player's placement options now is to send the disk to a shipping track in a locked region. He must place the disk in the first available space starting from the arrow, which in this case is this space. He will place the disk and get the token as a bonus. If the token gained depicts an attribute symbol, he will place this token here to the corresponding track and forward the attribute by 1 space. If the player gains a blue action token, he will place it on his harbor and it's available for any future turn. When a player captures the last space of a shipping track, the region is automatically unlocked. The governor card of the region will be immediately granted to the player that has the most discs on the shipping track, here the red player. In case of a tie, the card goes to the player that owns the disc which is more near to the deck of cards, among the tied players of course. The player who gets the governor card will turn it over and place it in one empty card space on his board. The brown space is a dedicated space for governor cards only, but if the player wishes, he may place it in another empty space. Whenever a player gains any type of card on his board, he immediately advances his attributes according to the symbols depicted on the new card. In this case, he will advance this attribute twice and this attribute once. And the player will also get a victory points in the end of the game as long as this card remains here until then. The next placement option for the player is to send his disk to an unoccupied fleet space of an open region. The last ship placement option for the player is to send his disk to an open sea zone that belongs to an open region again. Any number of disks belonging to any number of players may occupy the open sea of a region at the same time. Occupy is a very similar action. After the player activates the action, he needs to have a spare population disk on his harbor in order to place it on the board. If he doesn't have any, he cannot perform the action. There is only one placement option for the player who performs this action. The player must place his disk to any unoccupied city in any open region where he has presence. so we have some new words now. First of all, cities are these castle-shaped illustrations that depict either one or two glory points. To have presence in a region means the player has at least one disc placed already anywhere in that region. By anywhere, I mean another city, it could be another fleet, the open sea zone, or the shipping track of the region. Purple player, for example, cannot occupy any city in this region as he has no presence. And since the fleet space and the shipping track of the region are already full, the only way for him to get presence is to place a disc in the open sea zone of the region through a ship action. Please note that in Europe, all players have presence even if they haven't placed any discs yet. You will also notice that cities and fleets in some cases are connected with these lines called links. Don't get confused. You don't have to be linked to any of your other cities in order to occupy a space. For example, the red player could occupy this space even if he is not connected to any of the two other linked cities. Links have a different meaning. They hide a victory point and in many cases a trade token. The player who places one of his discs to both ends of the link, he gets the trade token, and if he keeps that situation, also the victory point for the end of the game. For example, if the yellow player captures this city, he will get all three tokens, increasing their attributes, and if he keeps that situation, he will get those two victory points from the links. Let's move to war. With this action, players can replace an opponent's disc on the board with one of theirs. However, this action is quite costly. First of all, they need to activate the action with any of the two ways explained earlier. Then, they need to discard another disc from their harbor back to their supply as a casualty, and then they need another disc that will do the replacement. Then the player must find an enemy-occupied city space or a fleet space in an open region where he has presence and kick him out. The kicked out disc goes back to the player's supply. In this case, the yellow player has just lost the control of these two links. With a payment action, the player simply moves one disc from one of his buildings back to his harbor. Now this building can be reused in a future action turn. Finally, we have the draw action. With this action, a player may take the top asset card from any region and place it on his board. The region doesn't have to be open. However, the player must have presence in that region that equals or exceeds the value that is depicted in the bottom right of the asset card. The total presence of a player in a region is equal to the number of discs a player has within that region. In that situation, every player has enough presence in the region to get this asset card. The player who gets the asset card has to place it in one empty card space on his board and then get the attributes that are depicted on the card. This illustration depicted on some cards means that the player will also get a population disc from his supply to his harbor as a bonus. In the action phase, a player can always exceed his card limitations. However, in a later phase we will see in a bit, the player will have to discard his excess cards. You will also notice that Europe has two decks of asset cards, a normal deck and a slavery deck. A player may take the top asset card from many of these decks. However, the bottom card from Europe's normal asset cards triggers the abolition of slavery. When a player takes this card, then all players have to remove all their slavery cards and thus reduce all the attributes that are depicted on those cards. How we discard slavery or any other type of cards will be explained in a little bit. Also remove all slavery cards that remain on the board at that time. And finally, we have the discard phase. In this phase, players must check and satisfy the card limits indicated by their influence attribute by discarding any excess cards. First of all, players have a governor card space which is free and does not count in the card limits that apply in this phase. The limits apply to these card spaces here. So in this example, I may keep two cards of any type plus a slavery card. So I don't have to discard any of my cards as I have two cards of any type plus a slavery card. But if my situation were like that, then I should discard one card to satisfy the limit. Please remember that whenever you have to discard any of your cards, you must readjust the attribute levels according to the symbols depicted on the now lost card. Whenever you discard a governor's card, you remove it from the game. Whenever you discard a slavery card, you place it face down next to your personal board, and this symbol here indicates that you will lose a victory point for each slavery card that you have discarded throughout the game. Whenever you discard any other asset card, it is placed face up in a discard pile next to the European region. All these discarded cards are available to any player performing the draw action if their presence in Europe is at least equal to the card's value. In this situation, only the yellow player could acquire this card by performing a draw action. However, any player could acquire this card, and apart from gaining the attributes depicted on the card, he will also get the population disc bonus. After the 5th phase, the round comes to an end. Before starting the next one, the player with the first player token will have to pass it to the player to his left. If that was the 7th round, the game ends immediately and we proceed with scoring. To add some more replayability to the game, Endeavor Age of Sail has introduced the idea of exploits. If you want to play with exploits, then randomly select 3 of them and return the rest to the box. All these exploits have specific rules regarding setup, regarding scoring, and in general they add more mechanisms to the game that I'm not going to explain in this video. All these special rules are subscribed on the boards of the exploits. What I'm going to say though is that each exploit is connected to 2 regions and comes with 2 keys. During setup, you will place all the keys next to the regions that are connected to the exploits. Initially, all these exploits are also locked just like the regions. Whenever a region is unlocked, if it has any keys next to it, those keys will go back to their associated exploits. If all the regions associated to the exploit become open, then this exploit becomes active. As soon as players gain presence in both of these 2 associated regions, they add one of their shields on the exploit and they can start using it. For scoring, you will use this handy scoring pad, which includes the scoring procedure. The first 3 rows of the scoring pad have to do with exploits. If you have used exploits, then calculate the score for each exploit and write the number at these rows. Secondly, players get victory points for the level of their attributes. Some attribute track spaces depict a symbol while some others don't. If the attribute marker is not on such a space, it has to be moved to the left until it stops on a space with a symbol. Then the player sums the numbers of the attribute positions, here 7, 7, 4 and 12. Then players calculate the victory points depicted on the cities and on the links they control. Then players count all the victory points depicted on their buildings, on their cards, and if this card space does not accommodate any card by the end of the game, the player gets another 3 victory points. Also, each player gets 1 victory point for every 3 population discs remaining on the harbor. Finally, each player subtracts 1 victory point for each slavery card he had to remove throughout the game. The player with the highest score is the winner of the game, and in case of a tie, all tied players share their victory. So that was how you can play Endeavor Age of Sail, and I hope you liked this board game as much as I do. But if you liked that video and want to see more, please hit that red button below and subscribe. Until next time, have fun and play more board games.